Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos, we take about 8 used firearms that have come into the store and give you guys about a 2 to 4 minute review of each to give you an idea of some different stuff that is out there on the market. Remember, the point of this video is strictly to be entertaining and educational. I'm not making this video to sell anything, to keep in accordance with YouTube's policies. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it now. Alright, this video is brought to you by our new website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you're considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please consider logging onto our website at WeBuyGuns.com. Create an account and submit your firearms for an offer request. Now, we will get to those, give you an offer, which do come with a printable receipt, which you can take with you to competing gun stores to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better offer, go ahead and sell it to us. We do provide you with the shipping label, and we do pay you with either a check or an ACH direct deposit. So again, we try and keep the process as simple and streamlined for you as possible. Go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Getting into this video, you guys know the format. We start off with the most common and move through the least common as the video progresses. Starting us off is a Springfield Hellcat. Now, the Hellcat itself is not too uncommon. They've been around since about 2019. But this particular package is the RDP, the Rapid Defense package, which is uncommon because it did just come out onto the market. But if we look at essentially what the Hellcat is, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about them by now or even seen them in your local gun shop. It is one of these sort of new micro Wonder 9s that has come out, to be a competitor to things like the SIG P365, the Glock 43X, of course now the Shield Plus. So we've now moved into this sort of philosophy of a small micro concealed carry 9mm, which would traditionally hold between about 6 to 8 rounds, is pretty standard for this package size, what we were used to, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Now we've gotten into being able to house, anywhere from 10 to 15 rounds and such a small concealed carry package. Now the basic Hellcat, of course, does not have this moderator compensator on it, if you will, or this optics plate. You can get the OSP version, which is optics ready, but this with the defense package, of course, comes with the Hex optic, which has a life of like 72,000 hours or something like that between battery replacements. So it's about 6 or 7 years of continual use, and it does stay on. So you do not need to engage that on-off switch between sessions with the pistol, or if you carry it as a defensive option, of course, you don't have to worry about having to activate that red dot to be able to use it, which is really the philosophy behind things like this. With this compensator out here, of course, keeps recoil low. It is self-timing and is a patent-pending design feature from Springfield Armory. The Springfield Hellcat in and of itself is a really, really cool package. Again, you get upwards of about 13 rounds in the magazine and such a small, lightweight package. Now, it's always been a little bit funny to me when it comes out to these sorts of things, being able to get that capacity versus the size. I would personally like to keep them as small as possible. Adding all this stuff onto it, in my opinion, sort of defeats the purpose of that a little bit. But if you do like the advantages of having low recoil impulse, so lower muzzle flip, quicker follow-up shots, or transitions between targets, and then of course being able to use a nice red dot. If you do have problems with using traditional 3-dot sights, maybe your eyes are a little bit weak or something like that, whatever makes you a better shooter, it's always good to have those features on your handgun, especially if you're using them in a defensive capacity. So I can definitely see the advantages to something like this. Let's talk about the market. The basic model of the Hellcat would traditionally be between about $500 to $550. Of course, the market is up. That's where we've had them in our store, even with the market being crazy, but I've seen people selling them $600, $700-ish. Now, in this package with the RDP, it is relatively new. Now, it's actually kind of funny on this. We had this exact one new in our inventory at $850, and it was sold, and then the previous owner decided to sell it back. Just I guess not necessarily their cup of tea or what they're necessarily looking for. Really good customer of mine, actually. Sold it back, and so on the used market, I would say, $7 to $750 is probably fair right now. Of course, they're in higher demand because they are new, but anyway, really, really cool pistols. Definitely worth taking a look at if you're interested in this Micro 9 sort of high capacity hybrid type of thing that's become popular right now, especially if you like those added features. So there is that one to start it off for us, the Springfield Hellcat RDP. Okay, up next I have a couple very popular shotguns. These are Ithaca Model 37s, both 12 gauges. Down here I have the 37 Featherlight, and up here I have a 37 Deerslayer. This one comes to us from a viewer in Kansas, and this one actually comes to us from a local customer. So the Ithaca Model 37, the story here would actually begin in 1913 with John Moses Browning. He would have developed a shotgun, which would later be known as the model of 1917. Now, at the time, the Winchester Model 12 is very much the leader in this marketplace of the pump-action shotgun. We've talked about the Winchester Model 12 a couple times in these videos, but it was really known as the everyman's hunting or utilitarian shotgun. They were not very expensive to produce. They were known for being very rugged, very reliable, and they were affordable by most people. So all the other manufacturers were trying to chase down and compete with the Winchester Model 12. Now, when Browning would come up with the model 1917, Remington would be given the rights for manufacturing of this shotgun. Now, they would co-opt that shotgun with a company called Pedersen, who would make some refinements to the model 1917. And then in 1919, the shotgun would be released. Now, Ithaca also wanted to come in with a shotgun, and they definitely liked the design features of the model 1917. And this was more in about the late 20s, early 30s that they were looking at coming out with their own affordable, economical pump-action shotgun to enter into the marketplace with. Looking at the 1917, they realized that Remington's patent on the design was going to run out in about 1933, so they had begun to get ready for production of this new shotgun, which is actually first was named the Ithaca Model 1933. Now, they made a couple design changes to this. The two basic ones is they changed the integration or how the design feature of the firing pin system, as well as they changed it from a side eject shotgun to a bottom eject shotgun, making it easier to produce, less expensive to produce, and actually usable by both left and right-handed shooters without having to come out with a different design pattern for a left-handed shooter. Now, again, they were gearing up to release the Ithaca Model 1933, which they were really excited about, but then they realized that Pedersen also had rights to the design, as they definitely co-opted parts of the original 1917 design with Remington, and their patent didn't run out until 1937, so they had to put the project on hold until 1937, and then in 1937 they came out with the Ithaca Model 1937, Model 37. Now, it's also disappointing for them because just a few World War II would kick off, and then all domestic manufacturers here in the United States would have to cease production on most of their commercial lines of firearms and then take up production on war material and firearms. So Ithaca took part in the manufacture of the M3 grease gun, the 1911 A1 pistols. Some Ithaca Model 37s were pushed into military service. Most traditionally, the military service shotguns of World War II would be holdover Model 1897s, again from Winchester. But you did see some Model 12s, you did see some Ithaca Model 37s. And later on, you would more commonly find Ithaca Model 37 in places like Vietnam. During the Vietnam War conflict, but again, Winchester Model 12s would be more prominent there as well. But on the consumer market, the Ithaca Model 37 has been a very big staple with many shooting enthusiasts, and it was really taking off with a lot of popularity in the late 40s and through, the 60s and 70s is where you would mostly see them. Price on them was very, very affordable. Again, it was really meant to be an economical or an economic based shotgun where most working class individuals could afford them and using as a sporting or utility shotgun. Today on the market, they are not that difficult to come by. There are many different variations, but in really good condition, you typically find them in about the $400 to $600 range. So while some variations of them are, I would consider, collectible, they're not really up there hugely in price, again, because a lot of them were manufactured and they were not meant to be premium shotguns. So again, really, really cool to see Ithaca Model 37s. A lot of people really like them, myself included. So really happy to get those in. Thank you again to the viewer in Kansas and for our local customer for selling these to us. All right, up next is another popular pistol that a lot of people really enjoy. This is a Walther PPK S. This one's specifically made by Smith & Wesson, and we'll get a little bit into that in a minute. And also we'll get into what the PPK S specifically is. So the PPK was actually meant to be a slightly smaller variation of the famed Walther PP, which was gaining a popularity in Germany in the interwar period in the 1930s. Now, when you take the PPK, you basically just hacked off a little bit on the front end and a little bit on the grip. This is actually PP dimension frame. So the frame here is a little bit longer, which is what makes this the PPKS. The standard PPK would stop about maybe right here. Okay, just making it a slightly smaller package. And the K was for Kriminal, or criminal in German. So Police Pistol Kriminal was the PPK, or just Police Pistol for the Model PP. Traditionally, they would be most commonly found in 32 automatic, 32 ACP. Early PPKs did also were chambered in 22 and in 380, but the traditional war or military or commercial PPKs you would find through the 30s and 40s would be 32 automatic. Now, the German manufactured PPKs, which you would commonly see as like officer sidearms or commercial pistols, and they were really meant to be just that. They were really meant to be commercial handguns throughout the 1930s. Would have a really nice high polished blue and sort of the marbled, very thin contoured Bakelite grips, and those can be worth quite a bit of money in good condition today. When we get past World War II, Manurin and France would take up some production on the PP. And then you would have companies like Inter Arms that would import German-made PPKs and PPs and French-made PPs into the United States. Now, Inter Arms would co-op with a company called Ranger to make the first domestic PPKs, and then after that would end, Smith & Wesson would license or have licensed production for the PPK from Walther. Now, on the commercial market, Smith & Wesson was not really deemed to be as high a quality as an actual German manufactured PPK from Walther or the Ranger / Inter Arms co-opted PPKs made domestically. So most of the PPK collectors, if we're talking post-war, really wanted something either Inter Arms imported from Germany or Inter Arms domestic distribution. Not so much credence was really given to the Smith & Wesson manufactured firearms. Now that has since changed a little bit, and even these are climbing in value. PPKs you typically find between about $500 to $800. Typically, pre-war or wartime PPKs would, those can exceed $1,000 plus, in most cases. Traditionally, again, the post-war PPKs are going to be found in 380. You can get them manufactured today in 22 long rifle. And now Walther themselves, about a year ago, started producing PPKs locally, and those have a new price tag of between about $800 and $900. Again, so you're typically going to be between about $500 to $800 for a PPK. They are really, really nice pistols. Of course, the number one thing that has made this popular is the James Bond series. And because of that, there's a lot of people out there who definitely really like and enjoy these. If we're talking about them from a practical concealed carry standpoint, they are heavy for what they are, and they do have a limited capacity of about 7 rounds on the PPKS. That's what, again, has the PP frame, or 6 rounds on the standard model PPK of 380. Remember, you can get an LCP or a Bodyguard or a TCP with a 6-round capacity at about maybe 20% smaller, 30% smaller, and at about half the weight. So again, from a practical carry standpoint, not the most feasible. So most people who are purchasing these, in my experience, are people who just want them as a range shooter or just sort of a nostalgic firearm that's something a little bit different to add to the collection. Either way, there's always buyers on these. They are awesome, elegant looking handguns. You see them all the time in movies, and so they are just really cool. But anyway, there is that, a Smith & Wesson manufactured Walther PPK-S. Okay, up next I have a very popular firearm. This is a Marlin Model 1894, which comes to us from a viewer in Michigan. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. The 1894, the story here really begins back in about 1881. Now, if we remember, at the end of the late 1800s, the lever action repeating rifle is gaining with a lot of popularity, really stemming off from the Winchester Model 1873. Now, of course, Winchester had popular and good-selling models like the 1860 and the Model 1868 prior to the 73. But the 73 is where this concept really began to take off in popularity. And then with bringing on with John Browning with the 1886 and subsequent designs as well. So by about the 1880s, there's a lot of demand and also a lot of competition in this sphere. So in 1881, Marlin would come out with their first lever action rifle, which was a top eject like the traditional Winchester firearms. And the first one was for large caliber black powder cartridges, which were typically used for hunting. Now, in about 1888, they would come out with a second model, which was also the same as the 1881 with a top eject. The design features were very similar, but it was designed for these smaller pistol caliber cartridges. Predominantly those found to be chambered in the Model 1873 by Winchester. So you have things like the 3220, the 3840, the 4440, and so on. But again, we're still on a top eject model. Now in 1889, I believe this was the first, no, Lewis Hepburn, who was a tech or a gunsmith working with Marlin, I believe it was actually the 1888 model that he came on board. It was the 1888 or the 1889, I'll have to double check that. But he came on board with Marlin at about that time and would be responsible for subsequent patent designs in their lever action lineup. In 1889, we see the first movement from the top eject to the side eject, which you have here. Now, this had a lot of popularity with people, especially in colder climates, as the top eject models would tend to have a propensity for freezing or not being as reliable in those sorts of conditions. When you have a side eject lever action, you also keep the firearm closed off from elements for the most part. You also have 4 solid walls to your receiver, making it a more durable action. So this was actually revolutionary in the lever action sphere at the time, and is predominantly seen on modern lever guns like Marlins and such today. Now in 1894, the kind of final design culminations by a lot of lever action aficionados would basically state by 1894 model, which is this one, everything has sort of come together into the ultimate final package for the Marlin lever lineup. And this is what you have. They went to a 2-piece firing pin, a single-piece trigger. They had redesigned the round elevator inside the firearm so you would reduce your risk for jamming. They simplified some of the design features and manufacturing processes while also making them stronger. So you had a relatively affordable lever-action firearm, which was really durable and also very reliable. Now, this has actually been in production since its inception in 1894, which makes it one of the longest running production lever guns on the market. Now with Remington's bankruptcy and everything, I don't know if they're still currently manufacturing them currently at this exact moment, but at least within the past couple of years, you could get them brand new. Now, in the 1960s, the United States commercial market was seeing a lot of popularity or gaining interest with things like the .357 and the .44 Magnum rounds. So in the 1960s, Marlin would come out with the short action of the 1894, which is what this is, and this one's chambered in .44 Magnum. And again, they just continue to be very popular. Now, if we're talking price point, you have the JM stamped barrel manufacturer Marlin, kind of the true Marlins as most people would call them, which have the most value, and then post JM stamped like would be this, and more modern like Remington era Marlin, which are worth a little bit less. So traditionally, you know, you're going to see these 1894s running between about 600 and way up from there, depending on when it was made. But something like this in this condition, you're going to find probably right now in the market in the 7 to 850 range, respectively, you know, depending on condition and everything. So anyway, there is that one for you in 1894. Always love to see these come in. Okay, up next is a really cool rifle, which comes to us from a viewer in North Carolina. So thank you so much for sending this one along to us. This is a Spanish FR8. The history with this would begin back in about the 1950s with an arms designer by the name of Ludwig von Gremmler, who was designing a firearm which would be adopted by the Spaniards as the Set-Me Model C, later by the Germans as the Model G3 by the Bundeswehr. I have a very detailed video on this topic. You can go back and watch it. I think it's called the Century C308 versus PTR 91 or something along those lines. Now, at the time in the 1950s, just prior to the Cold War, a lot of militaries around the world were trying to move from the traditional bolt-action rifle, which was found in use in most countries at the time, the Springfields, the Enfields, the Mausers. They wanted to move into something that was a little bit more modern, and what they landed on was this concept of the battle rifle, which was a magazine-fed, magazine-detachable 308, typically or 7.62 by 51 NATO chambered round. Typically semi-automatic, but fully automatic as well. And you would get things like the G3, the Set-Me-C, the FAL, which would be adopted, the M14, which would start being adopted in about the 50s through the 60s. Now, as Spain was trying to gear up with this new weapon system, they needed something that would be an ancillary fill-in for things like civil defense, civil guards, ceremonial purposes, training purposes. So what they wanted was something that could be produced alongside the new battle rifle, which could be used for those intended purposes. And what they came up with was the FR7 and the FR8, which you see here. Now, in the Spanish inventory at the time, they had 1916 carbines, Mauser action, as well as the 1943 carbines based on the Model 98 Gewehr, the Mauser action as well. Now, the FR7s were a design change, or I guess I should say a refurbishment built or a alteration made to their existing 1916s, and those were on the small ring action receivers. And then you had the conversions from their 1943 or from the Model 98 Mauser, which was known as the large ring actions, and those would be known as the FR8, which is this one here. Now, they would all be chambered in the 7.62 NATO, just so that they could fire the same ammunition as the Set-Me Model C. And there would be some design element changes that would give it more of a fit and feel similar enough to the Set Me Model C where it could be used again as a training implement. So if you're familiar with the Set Me C, this is a cocking tube that would be found on the Set Me C with the bayonet lug. Your barrel's here, your sight base is here. On the Set Me C, this is all virtually the same, everything in this area, except it's inverted. Where your cocking tube is on top, of course your barrel is on bottom, your sight would be up here at the top, and your bayonet lug is above the barrel. So they basically took it, they swapped it. Also your sighting system, so you removed your traditional Mauser sights, and they put this sort of diopter, I guess you would call it a ring sight. I've heard people call them different things, barrel sight. I guess barrel sights are really found more on HKs. But it's a rotating ring that changes basically 4 different aperture settings, which again is similar of enough of a sight picture of your battle sight, I think 200 meters. The Set Me C sight does not work the same way. It works on a paddle system which turns, but the sight picture is very much the same, so the sight functionality would be close enough. Still uses the bolt action. It is a Mauser action, of course, because it's just a converted Mauser with a 5-round internal box magazine. So a really, really cool kind of a piece of Cold War history, even though not really designed to be a battle rifle or a combat weapon in any means. Really meant more for training. On the market today, these are steadily climbing in value. Even though there's not really hugely a collector following on these things, they do definitely have a lot of a lot of interest on the market. I'm seeing them climb upwards over $500, so $600-700 in that range is pretty typical on these today. Just like all surplus firearms, of course, as time goes on, they go up in value. But if you're interested in sort of a Cold War era history or Spanish military history and arms collecting, this is just a cool one to have. And so there's always, even though they aren't really that prominent in history, they didn't serve that much use in history, they still are desired by a lot of collectors, I guess just because they're unique and interesting looking. So anyway, there is that, the Spanish FR8. Okay, up next is a really cool pistol which comes to us from a viewer in Texas. This is a Smith & Wesson model 4506, full-size 45 ACP, single stack magazine. Double single action, does have a magazine disconnect, full steel frame and slide. Now these are the 3rd generation firearms or 3rd generation pistols from Smith & Wesson, which would predate their polymer framed firearms that we know today. These are most prominently found in the 1990s, and I personally had been growing up and getting interested in firearms through the 1990s. You would see these sorts of things show up in movies, typically carried by police officers in film, things like that, through 90s action movies and stuff like that. So I've always had a huge interest in this series of firearm. Also, there was a reality of police departments actually using things like this, like the 4006 California Highway Patrol surplus guns you could pick up or used to be able to pick up for a pretty reasonable price. The 5906, the 5903. Then they came out with the aluminum frame like the 5903s. And you could usually pick those up as police surplus for not very much money, $300 to $400. And the 9mm, the 40, they were really, really affordable. Now things like this one, this particular model, these are raising in popularity and in price. They're not too common on the market, and these you typically find between about $750 to $1,000 depending on the condition and what it has and things like that. Here's another 45 from this same sort of series. This is a 4516, this particular one a -2, so like this, but more of a compact model. Again, this one came to us from a viewer in Texas. This one was actually from a local seller, so it did not come from the same source. But just really, really cool pistols. I've always loved these. They just feel great in the hand. You really feel like you're holding a firearm. Recoil impulse on them is light. The triggers on these are excellent. If we look at the double action trigger reset right there. And that's not just very quick. It's not just that one. This one has a bobbed hammer on it. So reset right there. Just really, really great triggers out of the box. Really great feel to them. I've always really liked these things. This particular one you might be able to find between about $500 and $600 depending on what it's got, condition, and all that sort of thing. So these are just really cool. There's really not a whole lot to say about them. They're not really hugely historic or have a huge amount of history behind them, but you can find them in 45, 10mm, 40, 9mm, and they came out in all different shapes, sizes, whether they're with a hammer, with a bobbed hammer, whether they're in the stainless finish or a blued finish. So they just made a ton of different variations of these. There are tables of them, the model tables online, and you can just see, like, if you added them all up, there's like 30 or 40 different variations depending on sizes and calibers and stuff. So you could really get carried away collecting these. They're just super cool. I mean, I see some variations of the 3rd generation Smith pistol come in, you know, pretty frequently depending on the caliber, the size and stuff. But these are just awesome. Love to have the opportunity to share them with you guys. So there's those. Okay, up next I have a very popular pistol which comes to us from a viewer in Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for sending this along to us. Many of you guys recognize it. This is a Magnum Research Desert Eagle. This one specifically is a Mark 19 with the brushed stainless chambered in 44 Magnum. Now these are most commonly, I guess the most commonly known, I should say, for the 50 Action Express, designed by a gentleman of the name Evan Weldon. The 50 AE was of Action Arms in 1988. Now even though this popularized the round, the first firearm to be chambered in the round was the Automag AMT Automag in 50 AE, which, wink wink, I have one of those actually coming, so we'll have that in a future video. The Desert Eagle would actually begin R&D and manufacturing, sort of the patents would start being designed on, especially for the operating system, in the early 1980s. Now, by about the late 1980s, this would start going into production. Magnum Research would come up with the design elements of this. Most importantly, you had a very interesting operating system where you had a rotating locking lug system, similar to like an AR-15 if you look at the bolt, and it's a gas operated system, not a gas blowback. So this is actually more indicative of a rifle operating system than it is a handgun, which again was designed for larger cartridges. Now, Magnum Research would actually co-opt the final design details and decisions with IMI, Israeli Military Industries in Israel, which would continue or begin production on this and stay as the primary producer of this firearm until 1995. At that point, Magnum Research would move production back to the United States in Maine with a company called Seiko, and they would be the producers of this firearm until about 1998. When Magnum Research would go back to Israel to the company now known as IWI, Israeli Weapons Industries, and then they would produce it until it would be brought home again by Magnum Research, and they would produce it at home in Pillager, Minnesota, which is where this one was manufactured. Now, in 2010, Magnum Research would be purchased by Car Arms, so even though the brand still exists, it is under new ownership, Car Arms. So a lot of people, you see these Desert Eagles, you see them, Desert Eagle, Magnum Research, IMI, IWI, Seiko. What does it all mean? That's kind of the lineage for development and production of these firearms. These are not only chambered, obviously, in 50 AE. Very commonly, you find them in 44 Magnum and 357 as well, and you can get conversion barrels to switch them out. This is the Mark 19, so you have the rails, sort of the latest design iteration of this with the more modern features like the rails, the ports, and things like that. This is the stainless version. On the market, you're going to typically find these right now used between about $1,600 and maybe $2,200 based on the condition, what it comes with, and all that sort of stuff. You can get older variations are going to be less expensive than that. On the new market, again, these still hover in around that price point. So the pricing has not been affected very much. They are still very expensive. They always have been very expensive. They are somewhat of a range novelty. There is not a whole lot of real practical use for something this large and this heavy unless you're going to be doing large game hunting or something like that. You can do that as well. But they are undoubtedly really iconic, really fun to shoot on the range. I've shot a few of these in 50 and in 44 Magnum. They are just a blast, a lot of fun to shoot. And they have just been used ad nauseum in video games, movies, all sorts of pop culture references out there on them. So they are a fun firearm to own and collect. If you're willing to pay the price tag on them. So anyway, really, really cool firearm. Thank you again to the gentleman in Pennsylvania who sold this one to us. Happy to share it with you on the video. Desert Eagle, Magnum Research Desert Eagle, Mark 19. Okay, last but not least is a really cool carbine that comes to us from a viewer in South Carolina. This is a Colt Model 6450 9mm carbine based off their AR-15 design. Now this was really intended to be the civilian version of the CAR-15 that Colt had adopted for military service with a similar type of application. Now these are used on either modified or loosely designed based on the Uzi magazine, 32 round capacity. And you have a basic AR-15 lower with the 3-pin modification, or this one's a 2-pin modification on, I guess the earlier ones were 3, for the insert for the magazine well adapter, the ejector, and all that sort of stuff that you're going to find right up here on any type of 9mm AR-15. Now it does work on a straight blowback design, does not gas operate, so does not need a rotating bolt. So just a fixed one-piece bolt design. And just very simple modification: pencil profile barrel, A2 flash hider, A1 style upper receiver. Very straightforward. Now, there was a limited run of these Roger Super Stock. You also found these on some of the Colt produced traditional 5.56 AR-15s, and these are a little bit uncommon, but really cool nonetheless. Really fun to shoot if you guys have never shot one. This is also iconic. This is sort of like a gas shield, really, more than it's meant to be. A shell deflector, modified cut ejection port here so that can fit on there. Really cool. Really fun. Now, these would come out prior to the assault weapons ban, I believe, late 80s, early 90s. I couldn't find an exact manufacture date of when these actually hit the market, but there were pre-ban manufacture of these, and there was ban era. In about the 1990s, prior to the ban, though, Colt would machine off the bayonet lug. So if you find it without a bayonet lug, it's either not necessarily a ban era, but could also have been a pre-ban rifle. If you see it with the bayonet lug, that's definitely a post-ban. Then there was LE used for these. You could find LE restricted mark receivers on these as well. This one, I believe, was made around 2010 or so. So definitely a lot of interest in these, not only from Colt manufacturer, but a lot of people do their own 9mm AR-15 builds at home. So with a straight blowback operation of this, of course, with the common and familiar manual of arms from the AR-15 platform, people do really enjoy putting these together. So anyway, really cool product. Definitely like to see stuff like this come in. The 9mm AR-15s, especially from Colt, which is really the one to pioneer this concept and has obviously been doing it for the longest amount of time. So just something a little bit unique and different. Price point on the market, of course, if we're talking pre-ban, ban era, or post-ban, the price is going to fluctuate. Something like this in this condition, and this one has like 8 mags with it, I mean, you're probably looking at about $1,500 to $2,000 on the current market, you know, depending on what the buyer is willing to pay. So they are definitely, like a lot of other things, going way up in value, whether it's just the natural increase in the value and demand of these sorts of things, or it's because of the market being crazy with everything going on politically right now. Who knows? But nonetheless, still very cool. Interesting carbines with a lot of interest and also a lot of interesting history. So anyway, going to finish it up with that kind of quick overview of this carbine from Colt, but we're going to leave you guys off there, and that'll be our number 8 spot for you. Well, that is all I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when I am posting new content. I'm going to leave you off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.